And it's BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Thursday. It is time for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. I am your host, Black Box Ned. True Crime Talk Radio is a segment that I created here on Black Box Online Radio where I can discuss multiple subjects within a single episode. As many of you know, this was started back in 2019 when I did a segment called Serial Killer Talk Radio. Then I decided to expand upon that. And in 2021, I launched True Crime Talk Radio. But multiple subjects will be discussed in this episode, and you can put anything you want in the live chat to the YouTube listeners, and I will try my best to respond to it. And it looks like we have some people here. We have DNA King, who says howdy. Howdy to you too, DNA King. Mike is here. Hello, Mike. How's it going? Zap says, hey, y'all. Hey to you too, Zap. Casbah says, greetings. Greetings back to you, Casbah. Charlie says, good morning, everyone. Good morning to you too, Charlie Don't Surf. It's a good evening for me because I've been up all night. Charlie, you need some coffee. You can get a cheers from the Fox because today is Thursday. You get to say hello to the Fox. No coffee for me, though. I'm actually drinking some type of red tea. I forget what kind of flavor it is, but it's red. That's something, right? And Calpoke is here. Hello, Calpoke. And Dean Hatcher says, morning, Ned. Dino from Nashville. Hey, Dino, how's it going? Now, in this episode, I'm going to do something that I do not normally do on Black Box Online Radio, and I'm going to be responding to some notes that I made. Normally, everything is just a straight running monologue, but I wrote down some things that I heard from a YouTube video that was discussing questions about serial killers. There's a channel and website and media empire called Lad Bible out there, and a lot of people wouldn't think that something like Lad Bible has a lot of credibility. But I actually used one of their articles recently on Ripper Wednesday. Every Wednesday I do a segment about Jack the Ripper. And, they posted something about Jack the Ripper, and I just wanted to respond to it. But they did an interview with a forensic psychiatrist named Dr. Soham Das. And it was a Q&A session, something that they called the Honesty Box. And I wanted to respond to his questions here for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. Charlie says, I'm drinking soda. I'm an addict. Charlie, I'm mostly addicted to Diet Cola, and the stores around me really don't have as much Diet Cola as they want, so I ended up drinking the regular stuff with sugar. I don't know why. I don't know how, but Diet Cola seems to just give more energy and such. But it's almost like when I'm drinking regular Coca-Cola, I'm just thinking, it's just not as good. I don't get it. I don't know what aspartame is, but it is cool. And Calpoke says, Dr. Das is awesome. And Edward Cypher says, this is every day. True Crime Talk Radio in the morning is coming to you every Tuesday and Thursday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Autumn of Terror. Okay, so let's get to some of these questions. Number one, what is forensic psychiatry? I think he gave an excellent answer saying that, number one, psychiatry is a discipline or specialty within the field of medical doctors, and forensic psychiatry uses their abilities, education, and understanding to either help solve crimes or make comments and descriptions about an investigation. And yes, I put in some connecting words there. His was much more concise. What do you do in the true crime world is actually the question. For somebody like me, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a forensic anything. I am somebody who simply tries to evaluate information and gain a greater understanding of humanity. And I think a lot of you are too. Question number two. What are some common traits among serial killers? And I would love to know your answers to this, everybody here in the chat. What are some common traits among serial killers? Because I had an immediate response to this. And I was just thinking, low in trait agreeableness. They have personalities that are low in trait agreeableness. Why would I say this? Because serial killers often do not experience empathy for their victims. They often don't experience a type of emotional bonding with their victims, and that comes from the personality trait known as agreeableness. And yes, there are different personality trait models. We have Ocean, the Big Five personality traits. There's another model called Hexaco, but there's definitely that low in agreeableness factor. Dr. Das gave a different answer, just sort of saying it's difficult to determine that because we don't actually have that many serial killers in the population. And here's something else, though, that I've also said for a very long time when I've been doing these True Crime Talk radio segments, and that is that serial killers are every shade of color you can imagine. anything under the sun or in the darkness. You will see personality types all across the spectrum. Extroverted serial killers, introverted serial killers. You're going to see serial killers that are organized and what? Disorganized, unorganized. And earlier this year on True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, I did some responses to the book, The Cases That Haunt Us by John Douglas. And it's one of his most famous books because he just lays out everything about how he came up with certain aspects of the FBI profiling unit. And yes, John Douglas is the godfather of psychological profiling. He's not the only one out there, though. Some people try to make it seem like that, but yes, there are many psychological profilers out there. However, he is indeed the godfather of this discipline. And when you look at these terms that John Douglas uses in his books, you will see them across countless true crime documentaries where you can tell that somebody is either a disciple of John Douglas or he has had an influence on them. And he's had an influence on me too. And I have numerous episodes about his material, even one where I discuss some things from The Killer's Shadow. It has that book page in the thumbnail. That's a book that he wrote about the serial killer Joseph Paul Franklin. And we have some things here in the chat. So what are the commonalities among serial killers? Ed Edwards says narcissism and antisocial disorder. Well, yes, some of them will have one or the other, and some will have both. Melissa says, good morning, Ned, and good morning, all. Good morning to you, too, Melissa. Zap says, lack of remorse and guilt. Sure. And that's heavily connected to narcissism, because I was watching a documentary that was done by, what's it called, Seven Spotlight or something. It was an Australian one. And what they said about narcissism is that a narcissist will reshape the situations to fit their own reality. They don't reshape their actions and behaviors to fit the reality that we live in, that multiple people can experience. What the narcissist does is they reshape their own attitudes, their own responses, their own emotional feelings to be in their own reality, where it's like they do something bad, then they think, oh, well, I feel injustice, I feel aggrieved, I feel betrayed, even though they were the one that did it, because they're reshaping their personality to fit some type of imaginary reality, reframing the situation to make it look like they didn't do anything wrong. And we have a lot of things going on in the chat here. Six Man Film says, I would like Douglas to do a revised edition and update of that book. I bet his thoughts have changed. Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know, Six Man Films, if you were to go back and listen to my episodes from 5 years ago on Black Box Online Radio, absolutely, my ideas have changed. Now, here's one. Question number 3. What is the most violent case you've examined? And, you know, Dr. Soham Das is a forensic psychiatrist from the United Kingdom. So he does firsthand investigations into this stuff. And he was able to pull from his own experiences. And he talked about the story of a man who murdered his mother, mutilated her body, and he tried to cut off her body parts and put them onto himself like a suit. No, this was not Ed Gein. This was a case that he claimed he worked on. He's from the UK. I can only understand that it was a UK true crime case. And that's what he said. And I was like, nope, don't really have anything that can top that. What would be the most violent case that I've explored here on Black Box Online Radio? You know, I haven't done an individual standalone episode on this, but the first one that came to mind was the story of the Midnight Assassin. The Midnight Assassin was an unidentified serial killer who operated in 1884 and 1885 in the southern part of the United States. And at one of the crime scenes, they said that the Midnight Assassin just so viciously mutilated the bodies of the victims that there was so much blood that the bloodhounds couldn't track anything. They just got so overwhelmed and confused, and their heads just started going in all directions. They started freaking out because they just couldn't follow anything because there was so much blood. And that was from an interview that I heard with Skip Hollandsworth, who wrote the book The Midnight Assassin. And of course, there's the story of Edmund Kemper, who, again, murdered his mother, much like the Dr. Dawes story, murdered his mother, and he pulled out her guts, more or less, tried to push them down the garbage disposal, but her vocal cords were so strong that it was choking the motor of the garbage disposal. He sexually assaulted his mother's corpse, cut off her head, just decapitated her, put the head on the mantle, and threw darts at it. Yes, that is one of the most violent cases that I've heard about. And another one that was brought up by Dr. Doss wasn't violent in the bloody and gory sense. It was just the story of a woman who murdered her brother because demons were inside him, so she claimed, and she just had to do this to get the demons out. And he was saying that that was an example of someone who was very violent for a deranged reason. Melissa says, I'm surprised to learn that a lot of them are educated, have families, respected in the community, live public lives, but have secret habits. They struggle with impulse, and they control, and they seek to fulfill fantasies. Yes, absolutely. You're going to get serial killers that are married, family men, who have multiple children, and you're also going to get serial killers that are the sad, lonely men who just live in the shadows. You're going to have female serial killers who also murder people, usually by poisoning, but some serial killers and female murderers do other things. I talked about Damina Cherry in the last episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, where she wanted to be a serial killer, but she was caught and apprehended, and she stabbed a man in the neck and was just trying to wait and explore about the blood that was coming out. Ed Edwards says, what about the Black Dahlia? Ed Edwards, Cyphers, excuse me. This is not the real Ed Edwards. What about the Black Dahlia? Well, the Black Dahlia case, yes, that could be the most violent crime that's been committed. That's a good one because Elizabeth Short's body is mutilated. But the reason I think why that didn't come to mind is Ed Edwards Cyphers. Correct me if I get any of this wrong. She was almost surgically mutilated, right? She was cut through very specific parts of her body, not to damage the organs. And as Steve Hodel likes to remind us all the time, cutting through the second and third lumbar vertebrae. It wasn't done in the case of somebody going berserk. She may have actually been killed because of a twisted art project, weird surrealist art. Now, the next question on our list is, why are people obsessed with true crime? There are many reasons why people are obsessed with true crime. You, in the chat, do you want to answer this one? Why are you obsessed with true crime? For me, I grew up with it. I spent a lot of time sitting by myself watching true crime because it was on TV. I got pulled into that world, and there are some programs out there that are very eye-catching. And there are also some programs that talk about true crime stories amongst other things, so they pull you in. Do you guys remember the days of TGIF? Thank God it's Friday, right? TGIF. And they used to just play sitcoms that were mostly aimed at kids and teenagers. I even think that their target age was about, 10 or 11 years old. And after TGIF, they would play 2020. And I would just sit there with my siblings and we would just watch 2020. And they would do true crime episodes sometimes. And also, programs like 48 Hours and Forensic Files are very eye-catching. And they're meant to be. They're marketed to the general public. So I just got pulled into it, and I've never been released. However, there are some aspects of the true crime world that I think that they wanted a more direct response to with this question. Why are people obsessed with true crime? Number one, it reinforces the principles of security in society. Number two, morbid curiosity. They want to know what happened to this person in such a twisted way. Number three, problem solving. The Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, D.B. Cooper, the cases that I regularly talk about here on Black Box Online Radio, they are problem-solving things. And I also want to share one thing about that. One of the reasons why I talk about true crime so frequently on Black Box Online Radio is people actually wanted to hear different ideas. They actually want to hear a different perspective. They actually want to hear a different take on the subject. I used to talk about all types of subjects here on Black Box Online Radio, and I think I settled on true crime is because people in the political world have a belief system and an argumentative system, and they have to accept that certain things are true, and they don't want to be challenged on those core principles. And it gets so angry, and it just turns into disagreements and shouting. Even worse than politics, sports, football. We got the baseball playoffs going on. I was just watching the highlight reel of the Mets and the Dodgers. I actually hope the Dodgers win the whole World Series so Ohtani can get a ring. He's been a great player all season. But when you have an opinion about sports, people start these arguments. And I found that in true crime, people really wanted to just have discussions, and they appreciated different takes on the subject. And they were also searching for different takes on the subject online. Unsolved mystery, unsolved case. Listen to somebody else. Of course, once you get under the surface in the true crime world, then people just start the arguments, the belief systems, getting mad about their Zodiac Killer suspect or D.B. Cooper suspect. Cowpoke says, for me, it's not true crime that is more death. I felt like I was at a funeral home a lot as a kid, and no one would talk to me about it, so I started watching documentaries about it. As your own personal experience. Good stuff, Cowpoke. Ed Edwards Cypher says, I only got interested with Ed Edwards, not really interested in anything else considered true crime. Well, you can always stop by for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. You can stop by and chill with the Fox every Thursday, Snoopy on Tuesdays. If you ever want to hear just something that's broader and across the spectrum. Jeff Thornton is here. Good morning, Ned, he says. Happy Thursday. Good morning to you too, Jeff. Happy Thursday. And Cowpoke says, also, I remember watching the news as a kid and seeing the police carting out Dahmer's freezer. Parents hushed me when I asked why the police wanted a freezer. Okay, that's another important thing, Cowpoke. I'm so glad you brought this up. There are aspects of humanity that some people don't want to talk about. Your parents don't want to talk to you about Jeffrey Dahmer. And I said this when I did my episodes on him. Once they started talking about the mummified hands in the cooking pots, I was like, I actually had those cringeworthy moments that I haven't experienced too much. You know, I talk about Jack the Ripper every Wednesday. Horribly vicious serial killer. Yes, in terms of crimes that were committed that are the most, what is the most violent case that you have heard of? Perhaps the murder of Mary Kelly would be another good one. But I don't know, just something about Jeffrey Dahmer's behavior. Horribly, horribly vicious. And Ed Edward Cypher says, what the Fox say? Yelp. That's the best I got. Yokoso is here, says, is the Zodiac case considered an active investigation? If not, why don't the FBI declassify what they know so far? You know what? You want to know why, Yokoso? Because they're selfish pricks. Did I say that? Yeah, I did. It's my understanding that the case was closed and then it was reopened. Okay, the next question here is, why are so many women into true crime? I think I covered that one in the obsession one, that they want to reinforce the principles of security in society. And the reason why this question was asked is because true crime has lots of female followers, but the majority of crimes are committed by men. It lets people know about the dangers of life. Next question. How can you tell if someone is a psychopath? Now, Dr. Doss did not have the best answer for this. He said that, you know, there's like the clinical way to do that, but that's not really what the question is about, because they're asking this thing. How can you know somebody in your daily life and tell if they're a psychopath or not? Dr. Jordan Peterson had an answer for this, and he said this during his interview with Destiny. Interview, debate, podcast, when Destiny was a guest on his channel. It was all of those things. And he said that you know if somebody is a psychopath when they sacrifice a long-term relationship for short-term gains. And Destiny, who's popular for some reason, I'm not sure why, was saying that, what? That's kind of a weird definition of a psychopath. And Dr. Peterson's all like, no, that's not my personal opinion. That's what a psychopath is, bucko. And I was just thinking, you know, that's not really what I think a psychopath is. I think a psychopath is someone who has a certain score on the Hare checklist. But in terms of evaluating people in your life, they sacrificed long-term relationships for the sake of short-term personal gains. That just sounds like people who are selfish and inconsiderate. I wouldn't really call those people psychopaths, but I mean, he's the expert. And Chickadee has a question about Wayne Williams. You guys are very active in the chat today, so I have to scroll back. And I would like to see that question. Thank you, Charlie, for letting me know. And we have Eric is here. Hi, Eric. He says, hi, Ned and all. William Kane is here. There are too many reasons for my interest. Morbid curiosity, mostly, I suppose. Well, there definitely is that factor. And it questions a lot of things that I even want to know why I follow true crime so much, because the morbid curiosity gets to me at a certain point. But I think I just want to know everything about humanity. Charlie says, I know a guy who betrayed his girlfriends just to set me up as stalking them so he could come in as the hero. I am so sorry that happened to you, Charlie, but people do things like that. They create these types of manipulations. They create these types of sabotages and calculations. Disgusting, but they do that. Ed Edwards says, there are a few good YouTube channels on it. I follow one that interviews a currently identified psychopath in therapy. It's fascinating stuff. Which one was that? I misquoted a channel that had a very good interview with a clinical psychopath. It's called People Are Deep. And the psychopath's name was Lewis, but I said the wrong name of the channel on a previous episode. And I've talked about a lot of other channels, such as Psychopathy is. Charlie says, strange, but women could have easily found out he was pretending to be me. You mean in your personal story, Charlie? Jordan Peterson DeHaan edition. Yeah, thanks, Quentin. No, Jordan Peterson is a real clinical psychologist. It's just sometimes he says some things that the average person gets worried about. And, he has a lot of beliefs in his own right. And he's very influenced by certain experimental forms of psychology that are not widely accepted by everybody. So just because somebody is an expert, and I do admit he is an expert, it does not mean that everybody is going to agree with them. And it also doesn't mean that you and the general public and me and the general public are going to agree with them. The next question is here. What is the difference between sociopaths and psychopaths? And there was a very bizarre answer to this one that was given on Lad Bible, that sociopaths tend to be more on the fringe of society, because I told you I was watching that 7 Spotlight episode and they asked the same question. And I don't know the name of the psychologist in that one, but he said there is no difference. And also giving a shout out to Jillian Peterson, who did a similar Q&A session on the Wire channel. She just said there is no difference. They used to use the term sociopath more in the past. I agree with that completely. Sociopathy is a variant of psychopathy. It's a form of psychopathy. It's a different factor of psychopathy. I think that's the easiest way to put it. In a lot of pop culture definitions, they would say that a psychopath is born with it. A sociopath is affected by their social surroundings. I don't even think that people use that terminology too much anymore. What people like to say instead is that they are the same. They're just different forms. Factor 1, factor 2, psychopathy. Question 8. Why do women fall in love with serial killers? Hey, women, all you women in the chat here listening to Black Box Online Radio, why do women fall in love with serial killers? This is something that I heard on Lad Bible that I have never heard from anyone else. My immediate response was, they hate their fathers. That's what I would have said. But again, they were asking a real forensic psychiatrist, why do women fall in love with serial killers? And he gave a very interesting answer. He said, number 1, they were not nurtured enough as children, so they project their own deficiencies onto somebody else. They look for somebody else with deficiencies. Number 2, they develop a savior complex because of these deficiencies, where they feel like they have to save this person because they were not saved as kids. Number 3, and this is the biggest one, it was something that they could control. And I was like, what? What's he talking about? A woman is attracted to a serial killer who's in jail because she can control him? And yes, if he's specifically referring to serial killers who have been identified, caught, and arrested, not like a woman who is being duped or deceived by somebody. Well, we know why she's attracted to him. It's because he's duping and deceiving her. But why are women attracted to these serial killers in jail? Why does a woman want to marry a man who's a convicted serial killer? Control. Where's he going with all this stuff? Because there is structure and order to that relationship. They can only meet at certain times. There's an expectation that they will meet at certain times. There are limitations on what he can do. He cannot just leave. He cannot just get up and walk away. There are very, very specific things that she can monitor. Emotional damage and the desire to know what this person is doing at all times. And let's not kid ourselves. Physical appearances. Yes, people are attracted to physical appearances. Next question. What is the most dangerous mental illness? Now, this was a 2-part response that they gave on Lad Bible from Dr. Doss. What he said was, in terms of just the likelihood to do something dangerous, antisocial personality disorder. In terms of something that is unexpected to happen, he said schizophrenia. My immediate response when I saw this on the screen was any psychotic disorder. Because it's not only schizophrenia where somebody is going to do something destructive in an unexpected way. People can have what? Psychotic episodes. Not a good answer, but that's what I would say. Charlie Don't Surf says, those serial killers cheat all the time and have emotional affairs and such. Of course they do. They don't play by the rules. They're criminals. You tell them that, Charlie. I'm not getting married to any serial killers anytime soon. No, I got it. I know what you mean. I'm going to be serious about that. They think that they can do something and that there's this person who has limitations so that they can operate within those limitations and control the situation. Of course they can't. 42 Lehman says, there is an actual interview with a killer jailed overseas about this topic of Hybristophilia. What's the name of the person in the interview, 42 Lehman? Christopher Valdez says, if Zodiac got caught now, he would have female admirers. Who, his grandchildren? Christopher Valdez. Do you mean the Zodiac killer in 1969? Or the Zodiac killer in 2024? He'd be skin and bones a skeleton right now. As far as being caught in 69, yeah, I think so. I think he'd be married behind bars. Bruce Davis got married behind bars and had a kid. Zodiac killer suspect, right? Ted Kaczynski did not. No fan mail for Ted Kaczynski from the ladies. Well, even if they did send him something, he wouldn't understand it. Ted Kaczynski was just on a different wavelength with other people. Charlie Don't Surf says it's a man's world even when they're in prison. Ah, well, some women can exploit that too. Hello, Gypsy Rose Blanchard. And 42 Lehman says the episode is called Discussing Hybristophilia with Serial Killer William Holbert, if you want to hear a first-hand account. Yes, I'm not familiar with any of this stuff, but I'll check it out. Thank you so much, 42 Lehman. And Melissa says, so did Bundy. Christopher Valdez says, like Anna Nicole Smith's husband. Oh, yes. Anna Nicole Smith married a man who was in his late 80s, almost 90 years old, right? And she was still in her 20s. And that's what started her whole rise to infamy, so to speak. Oh, and Ted Bundy had a little girl. Yes, Tex Watson, the other member of the Manson family, who was married behind bars, had 4 children through conjugal visits. When I said the other member, I meant the other right-hand man of Charles Manson. We had Bruce Davis, Tex Watson, and Paul Watkins. Paul Watkins was a liar, though. Next question on the list. How can you tell if someone is lying? This really isn't a true crime question. This really isn't a question about serial killers or even psychiatry. Psychiatry a little bit. How can you tell if someone is lying? What's your answer? People in the chat? Mine is you can't. All this stuff about the eye movements, all this stuff about, the face touches. No. I mean, I've talked about this stuff before, that I've been telling the truth and people have accused me of lying. Now, this whole thing about your eyes move up to the right, that means you're using the left part of the brain that's using imagination. That stuff's reasonable. But it only works if they're thinking about the exact same thing that you're questioning them about. People go to be like, I like milk. And so on. You can't. I don't care what anyone says. You can't. They made that show a lot. What's it called? Lie to Me with Tim Roth. I don't accept any of that stuff. And we have one here. How common is it for offenders to fake mental illnesses? I would expect that it's very common, and Dr. Doss said the same thing. It's very common for offenders to fake mental illnesses because they want to get the insanity defense, not guilty by mental disease or defect. And even an example of this that they believe is Andrei Chikatilo, the butcher of Rostov. He murdered 52 people in the former Soviet Union. And at his trial, he's freaking out. But they think it was all an act to get an insanity defense. Psychopaths are terrified of death. Some of them. Other people like Peter Curtin, he wasn't. He wanted to die and hear the blood coming out of his neck. Now, the next one is it true that 12% of CEOs are psychopaths? This isn't a serial killer question either. And Dr. Doss said, no, that's most likely untrue. I would also say that that's untrue. He estimated that 4 to 5% of CEOs are psychopaths. I would think that it's about the same. Sure, let's just go with that. I think it's less than 12%. And Christopher Valdez says, Kenneth Bianchi faked multiple personalities, one of the Hillside Stranglers. Yeah, people do stuff like that. And there was even this one case on 48 Hours where they caught the guy, and he was saying that he was hearing these voices that are telling him to commit the murders. But what he was actually talking about is his own internal thinking, like how you can talk to yourself silently. That's what he was saying. So that's more or less faking hearing voices because he's not actually experiencing auditory hallucinations. Cat Daddy Steve says, I got interested in true crime when a serial killer operated in my neighborhood and I showed up at a scene, watching with the crowd and detectives interviewed me. Wow. Cat Daddy Steve, how old were you when that happened? Was that like when you were a kid? I hope not. But there are just going to be terrible things in the world, very dangerous things in the world. And I also want to remind you guys that I will be doing an interview with Jerome on the channel Mysteries with Mr. Belchic, which is going to come out this weekend, and that will be discussing the Freeway Phantom. I was just reminded of that when I was saying bad things happening to children. Yes, the Freeway Phantom was an unidentified serial killer who committed crimes on girls and young women between the ages of 10 and 18. One more time on the channel Mysteries with Mr. Belchic. I invite you to like and subscribe over there. And if you want, you can also like and subscribe over here to Black Box Online Radio. It really helps out the channel. Subscribing is free. And if you ever want to support this channel, you can use the super chat, super thanks on YouTube, as well as buymeacoffee.com/blackboxonlineradio. And anyone who makes a donation or contribution will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. Next question. Did lobotomies work to make people less violent? Dr. Doss had an interesting answer to this. He said, no, they didn't. The lobotomy removes a portion of the prefrontal cortex. And I would think that they worked for people who were just so extremely dangerous that they weren't able to behave and function, and they just had to do something. But you would think they'd be able to control that in a different way without the lobotomies. Right now, I think that a lobotomy is just excessive and unnecessary. Next question. Does everybody have the potential to become a serial killer or murderer? Murderer, yes. Serial killer, well, yes. As I said, though, I just remembered something. On a previous episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, what I said was that if the exact conditions were present that would drive you to commit murder, would you do it? Yes, you would, because if you didn't, those wouldn't be the exact conditions. Okay, everybody has the conditions that are present. People would be much more likely to commit murder once, and they would experience something that Jordan Peterson has talked about with the story of Crime and Punishment and Raskolnikov. He always uses this as the example about why people don't commit murders or go on to become serial killers, because it's about how somebody commits murder and then they're unexpectedly overwhelmed with guilt, remorse, shame, sorrow. And I think a lot of people would have similar responses. A lot of people would be going through things in a very similar way, and they wouldn't become serial killers. Hypothetically, it's possible, but that's just a word game, more or less. I think that every single person listening to this show is not going to go on to become a serial killer. So I think that it's very, very unlikely. But here's something else. I was watching an episode about the case of Dalia Dippolito, and I've heard several different YouTube videos about her. She was a high-end escort who ended up marrying one of her clients, and then she tried to get control of his money, and she got him to sign the house into her name, and she even attempted to hire a hitman to murder her. But in all reality, she was talking to an undercover cop, and what this episode, which was also on 7 Spotlight, wanted to share was they really wanted to show the audio of her interrogation, of her talking to the hitman, of even a phone call that she made calling her husband, asking for help getting a good lawyer. He's like, you tried to have me murdered. You were going to set me up to be murdered. And they're just showing how somebody would be acting like they were a genuine victim. And what they said is that she's a very clear example of a female psychopath, the case of Dalia Dippolito. I first saw her on Stephanie Harlow's channel, and Crime After Crime, a program that I used to follow in the past, did a very interesting episode. Not as in-depth as the other ones. And Stephanie Harlow did a 2-part series on Dalia Dippolito. Episode 1 on her channel had way more information. But it's the whole concept of when someone believes that they will not be caught and that they can talk their way out of something and they are not going to face consequences that they care about, they will do destructive things. Interestingly, on that episode of Wired that I was just citing that was hosted by Gillian Peterson, she was saying that there's only about a 50% solve rate for murders. It's pretty much a coin toss. Flip the coin in the air, heads or tails. Will you get caught if you commit a murder? Which is shocking to me. Because you guys watch true crime content, right? When you are watching serial killer documentaries, or even worse, forensic files, when someone commits a one-off murder and they do things that are so unbelievably sloppy, or just committing the crime in front of surveillance cameras, for example, things like that, or they're wearing their work boots to the dump site that has the same dirt on it as what's found, near the bodies, that it's on the shoes that they wear every single day, or specks of paint or something. Maybe they keep the murder weapon in their possession. Ridiculous stuff. But they actually say there's only about a 50% solve rate. Curtis Johansson is here. Hello, Curtis. He says, I lived in Zach during the East Area Rapist. And the EAR, the East Area Rapist, was on the loose when I was a teenager right in my neighborhood. Sacramento, not awesome. I wouldn't think so. Be on the lookout for that terrible, terrible, sickening person. Calboke says they only catch the dumb ones. Well, look at somebody like the Zodiac Killer. I don't think the Zodiac was dumb, but he was just lucky. He was methodical, though. The Zodiac did a lot of things to avoid getting caught. Maybe he put the airplane cement on his hands. He committed the majority of the crimes in secluded areas where he couldn't be extremely witnessed. Maybe he was even wearing gloves when he wrote the letters prior to 1974. The Zodiac was a little bit smart. Okay, though, Cowpoke. Ted Kaczynski was mega smart. And the Unabomber is not somebody whom we can only speculate about, like the Zodiac and Jack the Ripper and D.B. Cooper. Kaczynski was caught and identified. Genius level IQ, PhD in mathematics. But at the time, the Unabomber manhunt was the most expensive manhunt in FBI history, in the history of the United States, perhaps. So, they put a lot of time, effort, and resources into that case, and they got the tip from his brother David Kaczynski, who recognized his language in the manifesto. Okay, Cowpoke has an amendment. They rarely catch the smart ones. Well, some of the smart ones are very good at hiding and destroying the evidence. And also, there's just bad luck, chances, circumstances, where, like the Zodiac, they put out an APB to be on the lookout for a black man instead of a white man, so he didn't get accosted. Melissa says, and the Zodiac left the area a lot. Can't be in two places at the same time. Well, highly possible. Highly possible. Okay, the next question here is, do you have empathy for criminals? Yes, I do. So did Dr. Das. Question for you guys. Do you have empathy for criminals? All the time for me. When I hear stories of child abuse, no matter what this person did in adulthood, I still think, wow, that's terrible. When you hear these horrific cases of abuse and someone goes on to become an abuser, it's terrible. Absolutely no justification for what they do as adults. Absolutely no justification for committing more crimes. The abused. Cycle of destructive behaviors. Sickening, disgusting. But at the same time, when I hear the stories of the children being abused, that was also wrong. And Cowpoke says, are there any that were caught where you think they got the wrong person? Yes, Cowpoke. Every Monday through Friday, I release shorts here on YouTube, and they also come out on Facebook. My Facebook name is Ned DeHaan. I also have a Black Box Online Radio Facebook page, and I put the shorts and reels out on Instagram under the names BlackBoxNed88, also on TikTok, BlackBoxNed88. One case that I covered was Abdul Jabbar, who was a serial killer from Afghanistan, and he had a very high body count. It was in the dozens. I don't recall off the top of my head. It's been a couple weeks since I've done that one. But 2 other people were caught and convicted for his crimes, which they later were able to trace back to him. Yes, I mean, that would just be the first one that comes to mind where they think they caught the right person, and it turns out that they caught the wrong person. One more time, you can like and subscribe if you want to follow along with all of these true crime discussions. I talk about loads of cases in the YouTube shorts here on Black Box Online Radio. Now, there are going to be some other examples that probably going to be a little bit more mundane, but oh, Christopher Valdez says Richard Jewell almost got railroaded. Almost right. Richard Jewell was the person who warned everybody about the Olympic Park bombing, and it turned out the real bomber was an individual named Eric Robert Rudolph. And that is one of the first true crime cases that I remember following on America's Most Wanted. As I said, I grew up with that show. And one of the reasons why is because we actually went on vacation to the South. And, we're driving around visiting like South Carolina. And we drove through some places that had these FBI wanted posters up for Eric Robert Rudolph. And I remembered him from the TV. And that just fueled my obsession with America's Most Wanted as a kid. But Richard Jewell was someone who was trying to be a good person, and they tried to vilify him for being the bomber. Those things happen all the time. Even 2 years ago in Boston, Massachusetts, somebody just picked up a package, and the package exploded and nearly killed him. So then they thought he staged the whole thing. Those things came out. Ridiculous. But, well, it's ridiculous to simply assume that someone is staging a bombing that injures themselves for attention. And to be clear, Richard Jewell was not injured in that way in the Olympic bombing. Cat Daddy Steve says, question, if Z did get caught walking away from the taxi, excuse/diversion, what excuse/diversion do you think he would say to Detective Tosky? Well, he would have been accosted by Officers Falk and Zelms, if that's what you mean. Do you think if Dave Tosky were to interrogate him later on, what would he say? He would just be like, no, I wasn't in a taxi. I'm just walking out here because it's nice. I got to get home. I got to take care of my dog. I got to feed my dog. No, I don't have a gun. No, I won't open my coat. I mean, it's cold outside. Come on, man. Can't you cut a guy a break? Hey, were you in the service? I was in the service too. Oh, yeah, you were in the Navy? I was in the Navy. How cool is that? I think he would just start spinning stories, talk as much as he can to make people less suspicious of him. Casbah says, I think he would have said that there was two of them. Now, Casbah, you mean if the Zodiac had been arrested and he's like actually in the interrogation room? I didn't do it. Yeah, I know who did it, but I didn't do it. Yeah, he shot him and he ran away. He just left the gun with me. Sure. All the time, people will have crappy excuses. Next question. Do psychopaths cry? Yes, absolutely. And Dr. Doss had some trouble with this one. I could answer that. Yes. I would even go back to a statement that I shared once from Dr. Matt Logan when he said that psychopaths have emotions for themselves. Psychopaths can cry, and this is my own observation. Psychopaths can cry out of fear and out of rage. Tears of rage, ever heard of that? Psychopaths experience rage. They can cry out of fear. It's reported that Ted Bundy was practically crying before his electric chair execution. Thanks, Fox. Casbah has another comment here. They can only get them for reasonable suspicion. They can't get them on probable cause. He would have walked if he had said that he snitched on someone else, and he would have railroaded somebody else. Well, I don't know if he would have walked because, if he had the murder weapon on him, they might not have believed him. I mean, people can even be wrongly convicted in situations like that. Next question. Can head injuries change the personality and lead to someone becoming a serial killer? Yes, absolutely. I don't know if it's the sole driving factor, but the areas of the prefrontal cortex, frontal lobe injuries can cause changes in personality. Temporal lobe issues can cause changes in personality. And this all goes back to the story of Phineas Gage, the man who was working, on a railroad, and there was an explosion and a railroad spike went through his cheekbone and out of his forehead. And reportedly, he was even able to sit up and be like, hey, what's going on? He lost a major portion of his brain. And back in the 1800s, they were still learning about this stuff, and they realized that not all portions of the brain are necessary for human survival. Some of them affect personality. And he experienced a very big personality change after that injury. And Dr. Doss even brought up one from his own personal experiences as a forensic psychiatrist when he said that a woman experienced a head injury in her 60s, and she had known somebody for 20 years, and then she just completely started lashing out in fits of rage at them. Completely different personality change. Now, with other serial killers, do head injuries come up a lot? Yeah. Alexander Pichushkin is the first one that comes to mind. The Russian serial killer known as the chessboard killer. He was hit in the head with a swing of all things, and they say that affected his personality greatly. Ed Edward Cypher says Phineas Gage had Lawrence Kane's brain. Yes, Lawrence Kane was also reported to have had a head injury that affected his personality. 42 Lehman says they claim Charles Whitman had a brain tumor. 42 Lehman, was Charles Whitman the Texas Tower sniper? That name rings a bell. Oh, yes, and you guys are answering that for me in the comment section. Christopher says, yes, the Texas Tower University shooter was found to have a brain tumor in his autopsy. Okay, lots of people are sharing some stuff about Charles Whitman. Yes, that's a case that I haven't done an individual episode for here on Black Box Online Radio, but in all seriousness, I would look into that in the future. The final question is, which serial killer would you like to meet? On Lad Bible, Dr. Doss said Ted Bundy. I would never want to meet Ted Bundy. I don't even care if Ted Bundy was still alive. Is there something that I could learn about serial killers from Ted Bundy? Yeah, but it's in somebody else's book or it's already in one of the interviews. I don't care what Ted Bundy has to say about anything. We have enough videography about Ted Bundy to fill a lifetime. Forget Ted Bundy. He means nothing to me. I was once asked this question years ago. It was a Facebook challenge question. Which serial killer would you like to meet for a conversation or an interview? At the time, I said Charles Ng. He was one of the Boneyard Killers. Some of you guys might know that I spent 6 years in China, and I've been to Hong Kong many times because I was living near the border of Hong Kong. Charles Ng was a serial killer who was born in Hong Kong and moved to the United States, became one of the Boneyard Killers with Leonard Lake. And the reason why I said that was I was just curious about what it's like, would have been like going from Hong Kong to the United States, and what experiences would have driven him to kill. Now, would I say that? No, not really. Charles Ng, I don't think so. You guys know my answer now. If I could meet any serial killer, the Zodiac Killer, sure. Number 2, Jack the Ripper. There was an interesting video that was done by Rob Dyke about 5 years ago, and he said that his response to this question would be, I can't do a Rob Dyke voice or get the hand movements down right, but he's like, if I could meet any serial killer, it would be Jack the Ripper. I would go back to London in 1888, and I would meet Jack the Ripper. I would ask him all of his secrets, and I would get everything, and I would never tell any of you. And I was just listening to that as somebody, watching this guy who's, I guess he's famous. He can say whatever he wants, millions of views and subscribers. I was like, why? You'd be able to solve the mystery of Jack the Ripper and you wouldn't want to tell anyone who it is? You're just going to play these games or something like you want to know and nobody else for me to know and you to find out? Why? Yes, if I knew the identity of Jack the Ripper, I would tell you guys. People wouldn't believe me. If I knew the identity of the Zodiac Killer, I'd tell you guys. People wouldn't believe me. Let's see. Casbah says he would want to talk to John Wayne Gacy. William Kane says he would want to talk to Jack the Ripper. Jeff Thornton says he's already met the Zodiac Killer. I can tell you about him. Yes, I have an interview with Jeff Thornton as well as with his wife, Melissa, and that is on this channel talking about Zodiac Killer suspect Loringdale Hill. I have a couple episodes about LD Hill as a Zodiac Killer suspect. You can find those here on Black Box Online Radio. Every Monday I do a segment about the Zodiac. Cowpoke says Graham Young, the teacup poisoner. I really wish there was more in-depth stuff about him. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one. I'm going to have to look more into Graham Young. Now, in terms of serial killer stories, and because this is True Crime Talk Radio in the morning where I can mention more than one story within a single episode, I was watching this video from Lad Bible, and Dr. Doss recommended looking into the case of Lisa Letby. And the reason why is he said that she was a female serial killer from the United Kingdom who really didn't fit into a lot of the expectations that people had about serial killers. And they said that she was a nurse. That's all he said in his video. And I'm like, all right, I got to watch at least one documentary about her. And before I did anything, before I clicked anything, I was like, oh, she's a nurse. Let me guess. She was a poisoner, right? Yes. Female serial killers tend to be poisoners a lot. They also tend to work in the medical profession because they're overdosing people. And I don't mean this to be mistaken or misinterpreted in any negative light. It's just a simple case of being more violent when you think you aren't going to be punished for it, or when the victim does not have the ability to fight back, With Lisa Letby, was that the case? Yes, absolutely. She actually went on to become the most prolific child killer in the UK history. In UK history. In the history of the UK is what I meant to say. Yeah, the case of Lisa Letby was covered by the Daily Mail, and they have a documentary out on her story. And it was hosted and narrated by two podcasters who claimed that they made the first podcast in UK history to document every single day of a court proceedings and just put it out in the podcast format. What Lisa Letby would do is that she would work in a neonatal ward in a hospital, and she would kill either newborn babies, newborn babies that aren't even a year old. And she did this by, number one, injecting air into their systems. I grew up in a bizarre way. I mean, I know who told me this. A family member told me when I was like 8 or 9 years old that the most untraceable poisoning substance is air. If you inject somebody with an empty syringe, you can kill them. And they were talking about this in the Daily Mail documentary, and it creates something called an air embolism. It's not embolism, embulose or something. It sounded like embolism, but it was actually a different variant of the word, excuse me. But it creates an air bubble in their system that's like an embolism, and that can kill people, especially newborn babies. She also murdered newborn babies by overdosing them on insulin. And ultimately, the reason why Dr. Doss is recommending this is because he said that she really didn't meet a lot of the definitions. She didn't come from an abusive family. She didn't come from a place of underachieving. She's a professional nurse. And I think the only reason that people are zoning in on her story is because of her physical appearance, that they just think that she had a non-threatening physical appearance. But she left these confession letters behind that had these stories about they look like they were written by a 5-year-old, squiggly lines and so on. And she said that she committed the crimes because she didn't feel that she was worthy of having children. She hated herself. So it sounds like it's a case of self-deprecation and destroying what she cannot have, which would be a family. She felt she was unworthy of all those things. No giant mystery there. And that's what we find with a lot of these serial killer cases. Again, giving a shout out to Jillian Peterson, who made the comments about why would somebody like the Zodiac killer commit murders? Why would somebody like the Zodiac go to places like Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs and Lake Berryessa, going after young people ages 16 to 22? Why? Because he wanted to attack people who were experiencing their prime years of prosperity. Social prosperity, mind you, not financial prosperity. But that's it. A lot of serial killers do that. Then there are also other serial killers that have the sexual motivation, and they're going to be committing those types of crimes because they want to just get some type of urge that is satiated. Then you have the impulsive serial killers who are doing this just simply because they're walking down the street, literally, and the murderous feeling takes over them. Completely unplanned. Organized serial killers, unorganized serial killers, disorganized serial killers, all of that. And Casbah says a good case to study are the Tylenol murders. Yes, I would have to do a larger presentation on that one. Ray Grant says, Ned, the air bubble isn't a sure death. Right, I think it was more likely that the children died because they were so young. They're like, 1 week old, 2 weeks old. And most of the victims that were killed by Lisa Letby were premature births. In fact, only one of the children that she targeted was born full term. But what is it called? I had this down pat. It's not the air embolism. It's like the air embulose, I think it was what it was called. Don't quote me on that. As you see, I'm not a medical doctor, but I never claimed to be. I mean, Ray, I would expect that the injecting air into an adult, especially a healthy adult, would be less likely to create that type of problem. But I'm just guessing on that point, Jeff Thornton says, same. I'm glad our person of interest is dead, except for getting more information out of him in a confession. If we had a confession from the Zodiac killer, that would be something. And Ray Grant would probably say the same thing about his Zodiac suspects, plural. 2 of them are still alive, right, Ray? Melissa says, I swear the potential of a victim of Tylenol tampering. I swear that I was a potential victim of Tylenol tampering. I've never been able to tolerate it or metabolize it since I was a toddler. Now, Melissa, do you think you were connected to something larger, like a serial killer story, or do you think that this was something that was just an accident, that you took somebody's drugs by mistake? What was it? Ed Edwards says, now I feel scared that Jeff Thornton is the Zodiac killer. Maybe it's in his bloodline, Ed. And Jeff Thornton says, I can kill a box of cereal in one sitting. I'm a serial killer. Jeff, you got a cheers from the Fox for that one. And yes. Ray says, if injecting air was more fatal, you'd hear about more cases of it. Oh, yes, certainly. I would think so. But I would expect, though, if she's injecting the air into newborn babies who were born prematurely, that their systems would be so incredibly weak that would just create the air bubble that would more or less take over their systems. I mean, just guessing on it. 42 Lehman says, every time my dad has to open up any product with the packaging, he cusses the Tylenol killer. Terrible people out there. And Jeff Thornton says, just killing time watching Ned here talk. All right, yes. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. And this episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning is winding down. If anybody has any final questions, they can put them in the chat. And I also would like to recommend some of the videos that I was citing in this episode. Lad Bible's Q&A session with Dr. Doss, as well as Wired's interview with Jillian, whatever her last name was. That'll hit me in a second. And I said it multiple times throughout this interview and this discussion in this live chat. And, of course, the Daily Mail documentary that was talking about these child murders in the United Kingdom. Lisa Letby was the name of the serial killer. And a lot of the things that I can follow up on will be coming in future episodes of Black Box Online Radio. So please put your ideas down for future episodes of this channel. True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning will be coming to you live every Tuesday and Thursday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And this will be going for the Autumn of Terror. Some people have made some great suggestions and recommendations. Charles Whitman, the Texas Tower sniper shootings, as well as the Tylenol murders. Lots of things to discuss here. And the teacup killer. What was that called? The poison and teacup killer? I'm going to have to look into that one as well. And Melissa Tappa says it was widely publicized that kids were dying. They traced it to tainted Tylenol. I'm so sorry, Melissa. Casbah says, I have to say that I'm kidding, but Ned, if you were a serial killer, your nickname would be the coffee cup killer. I love coffee too much to ever even think about having anything to do with killing people. Coffee is a good thing, Casbah. I know you didn't mean anything bad by it, but I love coffee too much to ever associate that with killing. Absolutely not. Christopher says there was a rumor that the Golden State Killer would log on to true crime message boards. Aha! Christopher, there are rumors that the Zodiac Killer logs onto the true crime message boards about himself. There are rumors that D.B. Cooper was on the true crime message boards looking about himself. And Ray says, don't forget Darren Schaefer. How do you mean exactly, Ray? Like, is there something that you were saying? And did you ever get in touch with him about being a guest on his program? Drop Dead said Ned. Said Jeff. Air injection needles poke is always looked for by pathologists at every autopsy. Well, I would, if it can kill some people. And Ray says I can also talk about Whitman. Yes, it's a case that has been definitely widely covered. It comes up in a lot of true crime things, especially in these discussions on mass shooters that we have, but I haven't looked into it enough. Cowpoke says Graham Young. Okay, Graham Young, Charles Whitman, the Tylenol murders. We're going to have a lot of things for the Tuesday show, a lot of things to go through here. And Ed Edwards says, I didn't know that. I like that kind of info. Quentin says, Karen Reed and motive would be very interesting. Karen Reed. All right, I'll look into that one. And Cat Daddy Steve says, I'm only here to study Ned's MO as the social influencer killer. I don't influence a whole lot of people. Does maybe 100 or 200 people every Tuesday and Thursday. That's about it. And Jeremy P says, do you and Ray still do a show together? Not as much as we should. Ray will be a guest back on here in the future, I hope. We're going to talk about some things. And Ray is still releasing episodes, though, on his YouTube channel, Ray Grant. You can find it by searching Ray Grant Zodiac. Quentin Broom says, also, the Apple River conflict is an interesting case as to self-defense. I did a short episode on that, though, and I talked a little bit about the Apple River killer on the last episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. And Cat Daddy Steve says if the cause of death is unknown, they will look into that. All right, Ray, we'll be in touch in the future. But as for now, everybody, you have a wonderful Thursday, and I will see you tomorrow for Cooper Friday, talking all about DB Cooper. And you can always get the shorts, follow me on social media, and you guys have a wonderful Thursday morning, afternoon, evening, and night, and the Fox will say goodbye. Take care. Until next time.